this conversation will be really kind of informal and get everyone excited, and we hope that then opens up more conversations for the next hour for you to come upstairs and join us. So thank you. Oh, and I'm sorry, I need to introduce Jesse Browntree, who is the innovation lead for the women-led climate resiliency at Pathfinder, and she will be facilitating the conversation amongst all of our panelists here.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you to CT. Thank you to UC Berkeley for hosting us. Thank you all for coming out and joining us in person to explore this complex intersecting issues of gender inequity and climate change. And a big thank you to those that are online. My panel at right, we're going to give them a minute to introduce themselves. I'm going to set a little bit of context, but perhaps folks can give a quick wave to introduce yourself. We have Ndola Prata, Barbara Merz, Sona Ibe, and Meg Brown. So a little bit of context for today. So the present life-altering impacts of climate change affect every dimension of life, less and less disputed, thankfully, across the world. And they're potentially negating decades of progress in global health. These impacts are disproportionately affected by marginalized people and vulnerable systems, and more frequent climate-induced disruptions overwhelm already strained systems, making access to sexual and reproductive health more challenging for women and communities. Climate change makes existing power structures even more unequal, keeping important perspectives of women, girls, and other marginalized communities community members from the table. And for a problem as complex as climate change, we need everybody. Because gender shapes effects on health, and because in many contexts, women are disproportionately at risk of experiencing negative health effects of climate change, it is critical that climate resilience work holistically advance women's health and well-being. As a global community, I think we're ready for the challenge. Community is at the heart of the work that we do. We cannot do this alone, nor should we. And working collectively sparks creativity, it fosters active learning, it heals divides, and it helps all of us do the work better. Collaboration is the cornerstone of this. Pursuing climate resilience means learning from others, from centering community voices, addressing barriers to participation, and crossing silos to bridge knowledge and skills across sectors. This work involves not only building grassroots agency, adaptive capacity, and advocacy skills, but also advancing societal transformation towards a more just and equitable world. Only together can we shape an equitable climate future where the health and well-being of all is ensured. And we are here today to do just that. We also want to hear from you all. So to our virtual community and those in the room, in lieu of a Q&A session, we have an interactive portion. So for those in the room, if you do not have an index card and a pencil, please raise your hand. We'll get one to you. You're going to need those in a little bit. If you do have questions, again, we're not going to take time to answer, but we will as part of follow-up. So for those online, please drop it into chat. We're going to be back in touch with you. And same to those in the room. If you're willing to share your contact information on the question, we'll follow up and make sure we get you the answer that you need. Now, let's meet our panel members, and I will join them myself. So audio check, let me know if it's not working. So we're going to let our panel participants introduce themselves, sharing their name, their association, and a guiding principle that focuses them in the work. Whoever would like to start it off, feel free.
Okay, I can start.
I love it.
So my name is Ndola Prata, and I'm a professor of maternal, child, and adolescent health here in the School of Public Health. I'm also the faculty director for the Bixby Center for Population Health and Sustainability. In the UC system, I'm also the associate director for the Global Health Institute. I'm just gonna start.
And Ndola, what is the guiding principle that guides your work?
What guides me is the privilege that I have from being a teacher and an instructor here at university, and the energy that I get from the students, from the young people and their innovative ideas, but also the ability that I have to have a foot on the field where I do my field work, and from communities that we serve, we get a sense of how we, with the little that we do in terms of our research, can or are able to change policy or programs, and how that changes individual lives in communities. And that sort of is an inspiration for me. Thank you.
My name is Barbara Mers. I'm Managing Director at Pathfinder, and I get to lead our strategy on women-led climate resilience. I am passionate about this work because I think it makes a difference, and it is incredibly exciting to see how Pathfinder as an organization, which over like 65 years of working in the field across Southeast Asia, as well as Africa, we're in 22 countries, really walking the path with women in communities around reproductive justice and choosing lives meaning, that this work actually connected with the climate crisis upon us. And so 3 years ago was recruited to join Pathfinder after spending time in the environmental field, really recognizing that women's voices are essential to climate solutions for this planet is what drives me. So it is courage as a guiding principle. When I meet women and men around the world speaking up about the truth, understanding the threats that exist in their communities, and also the abundant solutions. So it's really about the courage that I'm inspired by.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sono Aide, and I have been working in the global health field for 30 plus years, especially focusing on sexual reproductive health and rights, and both in the US and also globally. And I'm also a graduate of public health school, and so I'm very excited to be speaking here today to you all. What motivates me to do my work is really the perspectives of the most marginalized, most vulnerable communities around the world, how they see the different interwoven challenges, how they see the world, how our challenges affecting each of them. And so clearly, you know, keeping their perspectives in mind as we design different programs with them and try to bring the appropriate resources to these communities. And I guess my guiding principle would be don't run away from complexity, but continue to face them. And, you know, your theory of change might be a little messy, but that's how lives are. So we have to face that.
Thank you, Sona.
And I'm Meg Brown. I am a postdoc through a partnership between the School of Public Health, the Bixby Center here, and through Pathfinder. And I think for me, a guiding principle in this really is a sense of justice and integrity. And really, you know, being in community with each other, paying attention to the needs and desires of those around us, and thinking about how we can collaborate to really envision and create a world that is different from what we have right now.
And a quick note on language, when we are saying women, it is artificially narrow, right? And so when we say women, we mean cis, we mean trans, we mean non-binary individuals. Language is thankfully evolving, and we are in the process of learning, and we invite more conversation if people have different ways to express and also include. All right, so thank you, panelists. Thank you for being here. How are we doing on audio? Level okay, Karen?
The level's good. It picks up every sound, which is why I'm sitting so still. If I haven't moved, the camera comes to me. So, but it is getting checks that the sound is really good.
Well, thank you very much. As everyone knows, every panel has so many people working to make it all happen. Thank you. So we want to better understand this challenge, especially wicked problems like climate change and gender inequities. You have to revel in the complexity in order to create the beautiful solutions that are needed. Meg's going to offer us just a few items to help understand this complex and intersecting issue.
Absolutely. So when we talk about gender, right, our gender roles, gender norms, gendered relationships all shape how we experience the world around us, including how we experience climate change, both the risks that we face and the resources that we have available in order to deal with and manage those risks. And when it comes to climate change's effects on health, those effects happen through both biophysical pathways and social pathways. So thinking about, for example, the direct effect of extreme heat or natural disasters on our bodies, but also thinking about the way that climate change and, damage to infrastructure or its changes to our social relationships or migration patterns or livelihoods all affect, our ability to access healthcare and live full and healthy lives. And, if you think about, for example, with gender-based violence, we often see increases in gender-based violence after natural disasters. Women who are environmental defenders often face higher rates of gender-based violence as a result of their activism. If you think about, around the world, between 45 and 80% of smallholder farmers are women, depending on what region you're in. And agriculture is highly affected by climate change. We see different effects on mental health by gender, right? So your gender shapes what types of negative experiences you might be having. And so I think within many of these conversations, I think it's really important to continue returning to the data and returning to the nuance, because it's not really universal in so many cases, right? The experiences are very dependent on a particular context. And, within this conversation about data, right? So little of our research on climate change attends to data, right? One study looked at every paper published in 2020 on climate change, and of these, only 6% considered gender. Within the recently released, top 1,000 climate scientists, only 112 of them were women. And then when it comes to looking at this data, within the climate space that is considering gender, if it does, very often the data are disaggregated along a gender or a sex binary, right? So the information that we have about how non-binary individuals are experiencing climate change is even more limited. And it's a really big gap in our knowledge when it comes to really, understanding what needs to be addressed and what kinds of things are going to be able to work in the future. And so, if this is something that you're curious about and you want to dive deeper into it, Pathfinder last fall at COP27 released a solutions guide on climate change, gender, and health that goes into all of that in greater detail. But I think, one of the most important things that we can do really is to continue to call attention to the importance of including gender in our conversations about climate change and health, part of what we are doing here today.
Indeed, we are. Thanks, Meg, for helping us appreciate the challenge more. We're gonna flip it and start out with some positive. Though there are great needs we need to shift, the numbers make that really clear. I think you said 112 out of 1,000, shocking, of top climate scientists. We wanna get to success. And so, Sono, I'd like to turn to you first to say, what do we know today that works to improve health, gender equity, and climate resiliency?
Sure, thanks. And earlier when I introduced myself, I didn't say that I used to work for Pathfinder, Pathfinder International for 10 years. And during that time, we started some programs that integrated sexual reproductive health and rights with women's rights, women's economic empowerment, and also with conservation. And usually, of course, related to livelihoods generation. So there were a suite of projects, but one of them was particularly long-term and successful. It was around Lake Victoria Basin. You can read about that in Pathfinder's websites and materials, but there's a replication now of that project in rural Western Uganda near the Ruwenzori Mountains. And it's implemented by a group called Ruwenzori Center for Research and Advocacy. And they really have embodied that spirit of integrated programming. So what they're doing is trying to gather women who are particularly from marginalized households, including women who are taking care of AIDS orphans, for example, or adolescent mothers. So these are heads of households who are women. They're struggling with agriculture right now because there's been a long drought and they're not used to this new tempo of rainfall. So a lot of components of how to make agriculture work in this new climate environment is very important. So things like, how to tend to soil health, or how to use rainwater catchment tanks. How do you select different types of vegetables to plant and when? So all of this knowledge is being taught by an agriculture expert who is also a woman, and she goes around house to house. But at the same time, talking about nutrition and how to link that to reproductive health care. So these women are now, in a group, and there's district government health outreach teams that go and serve their reproductive health needs on occasion. So those are, some of the linkages that one could make in a project that's integrated and comprehensive.
You mentioned not turning away from complexity. I think that that is a fine example of that. Thank you, Sona.
I'd love to build on that, and yeah, hats off to all the work that you've launched, including its Tungani, TUUNGANNE, on the website. There's a decade of experience, and really holding that baton and carrying it forward on this intersectional work, particularly environment and health with Pathfinder's work. I'm going to point to a different story, different part of the world. Let's visit Pakistan for a moment. In 2021, we launched our first on-the-ground project in Pakistan with women-led climate resilience, and it was successful in ways we didn't anticipate, which I think is going to be a mantra around the climate crisis, in ways we didn't anticipate, because so much is unpredictable. In an area right on the India border called Tharparkor, the Pakistan challenge that we heard about from our country team was women in that community were experiencing extreme drought, which had cascading impacts on health, not least of which was also the further and further they would have to go to get water needs met, also impacted sexual reproductive health and rights, including maternal and child well-being. So there were impacts compounded by extreme heat. So drought and heat were the threats. In that coming summer, the extreme heat, you may remember, was above 50 degrees centigrade on multiple days. That's a heat threshold that scientists have reported as systems of the body begin to shut down. Also, the earth begins to respond, and the glaciers of the Himalaya began to melt. Later, just a few months, those glacial waters came down, and there were floods in Pakistan. You might recall that. So the work that Pathfinder set down on the ground to actually create collective resilience community, understanding of what was happening, access that went beyond just local clinics to connecting the dots to clinics in neighboring region, served in the flood. So our learning was that you may think you're beginning with one situation of a climate threat, profound drought or extreme heat, and shortly thereafter, it could be something else. The climate threat turns to flooding in the region. Might also think about that in the case of California. But in this case, it was extremely interesting, and we're still listening and learning about what it means to create resilience that responds to a threat that you may not even be designing to address.
Jessie, I just wanted to mention also some examples of success from my vantage point as an academician. And actually, some of the Tungani projects that you start, I actually teach in my classes as part of case studies for students. So that's one. But in general, we've made also significant progress in developing countries, for example, in allowing sort of individuals to have reproductive choice. So more choices are available by bringing sort of contraceptives into the communities, which is an area that I work. And so the transdisciplinary sort of a work of climate experts with population experts and others also determined or came up with solutions. And I noticed that of the top 10 solutions, there are many, but just in the top 10, I realized that 2 of them intersect with my work, girls' education and voluntary family planning. So it gave us an opportunity to actually be able to, in a multidisciplinary way, to link voluntary family planning to fertility, to rapid population growth and the impacts on the environment. So, and that's how I get excited. Somebody like me that was, a clinician focusing on providing sort of a maternal sexual reproductive health services, then expands its vision and the ability to teach the students on how to look at the individual, but not just as one sort of a individual in the society, but how it interacts with the environment and how what we do sort of impacts other areas of the environment.
Thank you. It's, we've talked a lot about complexity, right? These intersecting challenges, these changing challenges, and the truth comes down to resourcing, right? Like we have to appreciate this. We also understand that organizations have different missions, funding streams have different norms, right, or portfolios. So I'm curious, as we appreciate this complexity, as we think about unknown and compounding issues that are happening, what other resources are required? And perhaps a follow-up or to complement to this of how might we work differently given the shifts that we need? Barbara, I'll turn to you to start this off.
Thanks. Yes, it's actually hard in today's world, in a poly-crisis world, to know where to focus. I agree. It is absolutely, it's resourcing not just money in any sense, but attention, policy direction, really the resources required to simply be creative, which requires some spacious time, right? There's a lot of regulation in a very dysregulated world. For me, the resourcing that I have been surprised is underinvested is the resourcing to determine in this immersion field what impact really looks like. So to get there, you have to have a shared agreement on what resilience is. We have to be able to really get into circles of shared learning, particularly from on the ground leadership and community members, voices who know very, very well what is relevant and the fit. So how can we weave in those? So I think that the underinvestment in this emergent field, in this layer, which will help us collectively listen and actively learn together, is one of the resourcing challenges that I think.
Okay. What would others like to add?
Yeah, so I listed about 3 things that come to mind, top of mind for investment. One is just climate education, simple and clear. And there's a lot of hunger, of course, among young people to gain more climate knowledge. And even among policymakers, they're really seeing the impact now and seeing how challenged their countries will be. So they need more information around climate science, who are the actors, what are the emitters of greenhouse gases, how can they change lifestyles and habits and systems, design future urban systems that respond to all of these crises. And so I think that is a big investment that is lacking right now, basic climate education, both in school and out of school, and even for high-level policy makers. So second, I think, the picture that was up there as we were walking in showed what a male-dominated field it is, and climate scientists have mostly been men. And so I think just the resources that Barbara just alluded to, of getting women and girls to the table, to invest in them, to have a conversation with the policymakers, with the climate scientists, with the designers of the future infrastructure, to tell stories, to understand their unique perspectives of how what the future could look like. That's very different from the one we have today. And then third, I would say, definitely there's still a huge gap in climate resilience and adaptation funding. And again, coming up with key performance indicators around what is gender responsive climate change, adaptation and resilience programming. So there's a wide open field, and a lot of, great minds could come together and design and make a difference in the next, maybe a year or two.
Make it faster, right?
Yes, fast.
Go to your point about funding of resiliency and adaptation. I come from the climate mitigation world, which is predominantly about emissions reduction. And I have found I've come to the resiliency side of things because we're out of time and we have to invest in it. And that's where I want to put my energy. But I'm seeing a shift in the field where there was this expansion to include more just solutions. And I've been starting to see some shifts of returning back to like the tech solutions, mitigation only. And so it's an interesting observation. Of course, there are people that are doing more expansive things, but it's something I've observed with the climate funding community and climate community, a return to mitigation only, which I don't think reflects the complexity of our present reality. Thank you for naming that, and others. How about others? Any advice about working or resourcing this work?
Well, in my wildest dreams.
Oh, I love this.
And I'm saying this because nobody dreams more hours than those of us in academia. Because we kind of have the luxury to dream and just, think about 20 years from now. It's just part of the nature of the job. But in my wildest dreams, I would like to see investments in a little bit more collaboration, in the creation of the second, third generation of the projects that Sono and Barbara were talking about, where we actually go donors, community partners, implementing agencies, to academicians. We go to the field and sit with the communities and design what works for them. What is the solution, the best solution for those particular communities? We all design great projects in our offices. I do the same. This is not a criticism to anybody, but it's time to actually co-design with those who would suffer the most if nothing gets done, and those who would benefit the most if something is done appropriately, not culturally intrusive, with the resources, or optimizing or maximizing the resources that exist for that particular community. So, it is a wild dream, but attainable, I think.
Why not?
So I challenge all of us to actually move into that direction, because I think that, we work towards better and through collaborations, but also towards sustainability.
Mike, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think just this idea of sustainability and like really holding the idea of true sustainability with us, not just sustainability in terms of, like we've offset the carbon of this initiative, but really sustainability in terms of what we can sustain, like what work can be carried forward. And I think, Barbara, you mentioned earlier, the project in Pakistan being successful in ways that we hadn't imagined. And I think in this conversation about, resources and how do we learn and what does impact mean for us, there's also something there in terms of, when we're engaging collaboratively and with communities, and there's so many more opportunities for learning beyond what we might have expected to see at the outset, because all of those other effects are so important for us to know about as well. And so I think for me, that's something that really stands out, thinking about from just a more expansive perspective of what we're carrying forward, even after the end of these projects. And also thinking, from a project-oriented perspective, which so much of the work often is, thinking about gender equity really not as a community level issue, but as a whole of society issue. And that, inclusion of diverse voices is something that's really important, from communities, but all the way up, thinking about, women's voices in healthcare systems, in community-based organizations, in the organizations of implementing partners, in the composition of the research team, with the policymakers who we're engaging with, thinking about it all the way throughout the full scope of the work.
I guess a follow-up to that, Meg, is just in the philanthropic world, right? You write a proposal, you deliver the proposal. So how, any advice, a quick follow-up to the panel members, this work is emergent, this climate change impacts are changing or, and unanticipated and anticipated rates. Any advice for this to increase flexibility and to perhaps to change the pace of how we can work so that we may be more inclusive for others? Any advice?
Just do it.
Oh, great.
No, we have to do it. We have to start somewhere, and it will bring some of us to the uncomfortable sort of a space that we haven't been before, but we have to start. We have to start somewhere. We owe it to the next generations that we start that work. Maybe we don't finish it, but we have to start.
I'm with you, Angela. I think it is about getting in and being very honest up front that this is a journey. And so some of the predictable milestones, you're going to miss the real learnings if you only stick there. So there are some profiles. And Meg, you and I were talking before this panel on resourcing on a different level, which I think is important to raise the flag here too, around ensure that you're also sustaining yourself in this process, because it is a long journey. The map is unclear, and there's a lot of potential to just be going full tilt all the time. So having discernment about how to ensure that you're working in ways that are uplifting to your spirit, connecting to others who actually share the same stories. I think there's something too about, let's make sure we're resourcing ourselves in this work so that it actually brings some joy as we are in communication, because it's a very heavy topic to be talking about the disappearance of biodiversity on our planet, to be talking about ecocide, to be talking about places where people can no longer hospitably live, though all of their ancestors have. And I mean, those are heavy topics. So I just want to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's a little bit ironic given the urgency of the climate crisis, but so much of doing the work well is actually, I think, about slowing down and pausing and really connecting with the people who we're with and the place that we're in, and taking the time to invest in that as part of the process, and moving away from approaches that are more reactive or approaches that are really, trying to like maximize, as much as possible, as quickly as possible, but, shifting, to something that is more connected and sort of resists those approaches that really push us to go as fast as possible without taking the care to look around at each other and what's really needed.
So anything?
Yeah, I think this is a very exciting moment. It should be for investors and donors, because we have the chance to create a whole new economy that's green and that's based on clean energy, and make fossil fuels, a thing of the past. And so this is a great time for creativity and innovation and new thinking, new visioning, and a whole generation of job creation, right? For all of the young people who want to be skilled in this new economy. And so, let your imagination run wild in terms of the kinds of occupations, that we need for the future. And so I think it's that kind of investment strategy of, a new future economy is an exciting time for donors. Should be.
We're doing world building at this point.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. And making sure half of the population is also there with their great ideas.
You all have already shared some advice about how we can design programmatically the programs that we need, how to take care of ourselves. I think we could all use a little bit of advice, those that are working on wicked problems like gender inequity and like climate change. So I'd like to do another round from you all to share what advice you have with others that are either trying to better make these connections, or to students that are pursuing this or wanting to focus in a career. What advice do you have to these individuals to make the connections, to stay creative and to take care of themselves in the process. Anything to add? I would love it.
Well, I think that my advice to everybody, but especially young people that I interact with every day, is that to get as much knowledge as possible. So, for example, Sonu mentioned climate education. Get the awareness that is needed so that we know, and we can acknowledge. And with that, I think that each one of us can be part of the solution. Yes, policies are important, specific programs are key, donors are important, but each one of us with knowledge about how we should interact and how our interaction affects the environment, we can all participate in the solution. Small things, but important. And I actually think that that is something that we don't need to wait for young people to get to university to learn. We can start that in elementary school. About our connection and our sort of as humans. I think this world as one world, right? Where humans, animals, and plants and other materials, work as one. So when the early we know our roles and how we can do better, the earlier we start to adopt sort of a new behaviors, and that leads to individual, family, and then community change for improvement. Thank you.
I would say don't think too small. We actually need to free ourselves from the current paradigms. And there are wonderful solutions out there. Just to name a few that Pathfinders from countries where we've worked really appreciate the work in Egypt under our leadership with putting solar panels on health clinics. In Ethiopia, we have great work happening with kitchen gardens around maternal delivery units. So places where people can come and actually learn from each other while also welcoming a new child into the world. Another, I think we've learned a lot about mental health in Bangladesh with a youth-led project on really understanding impacts of climate, but empathizing with and compassion with others who are facing the onslaught of the continual floods of the Delta that Dhaka faces. And then in the Sahel, we've seen some excellent idea of climate smart ag, as Sona was talking about in West Africa. We're now doing that work in East Africa and West Africa now. And just seeing what's emerging, I feel like people are thinking creatively, and for all of us to just sort of lend some boost to the ideas that are out there. It's time for igniting ideas that otherwise are just sitting around waiting to be put to use. So,
Next, Sonu, what advice do you have to others?
Yeah, I guess I would say, the world needs obviously more connectors and people who are not afraid to step out of their expertise to reach across to other disciplines and have that conversation. And you yourself, don't have to feel afraid that you're not an expert in X or Y to have that conversation, but really to get over that barrier, to reach out and create policies together, create programs together, because chances are they're also kind of waiting for somebody to come to them to do this. And so I would say, that connector role, the networker role becomes increasingly important.
Yeah, and I think for me, really like what Andola was saying about curiosity is so important, like really finding that space of joy and of where you feel like you can contribute and to continue learning, I think is so beautiful. One of my first research projects in grad school was working at a nature center with kids, and spent all summer, looking at birds and catching spiders. And in that, the camp had a rule of no doom and gloom. Their philosophy was that if they could inspire a love for nature and a connection with nature with these kids, then they would grow up to be good stewards of the environment around them. And, you know, as adults, we don't really have the privilege of no doom and gloom, right? We need to know the realities of doom and gloom in order to build something that's responsive to that and better than that. But to also know the parts of the work that bring us joy and make us feel connected to each other, to the world around us, and fill us up, like that's what sustains us. Because the reality is, like, this area of work is hard. It takes a toll. And so if we don't take the time to do that, then we, you know, really miss out. And I think the other thing too, like as a young person in this space, is to not take no for an answer, you know, to really hold on to that sense of integrity, the sense of recognizing when something is wrong or recognizing when something could be better or different, and really staying curious about the possibilities, and finding people who say like yes and are willing to be in that community with you to take those ideas and push them forward and grow them into something even bigger together. You know, there's no need to feel alone in this work, and it's really about finding your community who you're working with together in that.
I've just been jotting down notes, and C seems to be the letter of the day. So just to recap a little bit of some of it, we've got curiosity, creativity, collaboration, community, co-creation, cross-discipline, challenges. And I want to build on perhaps connecting a few points here, which is the point about love of nature. You can't love nature without loving other people, right? We see each other as fully connected to it. And my advice that I'm trying to reclaim for myself professionally, to be honest, is like, I'm not coming from fear, like I'm coming from love, because this work, the future that needs to be built, it needs a more sustaining and a more creative emotion than fear, because that doesn't put us at our best. We need our best for the work that's coming. Thanks, folks, for adding. So I want to turn to you all, and I want to turn to people that are online. We want to crowdsource this work, as we've just touched on briefly. I'm sure you all well know, in greater complexity is really challenging. So we have two questions for you, and we're actually going to take time and perhaps offer a awkward 5-minute quiet pause. Thank you for indulging that. Two questions for you. And first one is, what actions are you already taking, either on climate change only, or increasing gender equity, or even better, that connection? So number one, what actions are you already taking? Number two, what advice do you have to share? For those here, please fill out the index card. For those online, please drop it into chat or whatever available feature we have. And I'm going to put a timer on my clock. Just a note for folks, if this is feeling odd, a little bit of moment of reflection to both process the wisdom that we've heard from others, but I think giving ourselves a minute to truly slow down. I invite you all to do that. So 5 minutes. Let's hear what you got.
Anyone need a note card?
in just another minute. All right. Keep jotting down those notes. We all need more time for advice and action. I would love to open it up to the room here and Karen online, if you wanted to add either action that you're already taking as an individual or advice. Again, this is an opportunity to crowdsource. We need everyone's opinion. And as we mentioned, some of these actions can be relatively small in isolation. It's part of this holding the collective that we start to understand the needed magnitude. Karen, would you like to start us off online and then we'll turn to the room here?
Sure, I'm hearing lots of messages around like that this is a long haul, so well-being, and that we have to keep up the campaigns and the advocacy, and they can't end like right after the meetings end. White Ribbon Alliance mentioned how we need to ask women what they want. They're already adapting, they're already doing things, and so that's the work they're doing on the ground to ask, you know, what are they doing, what's working. Eileen Spicer mentioned that we need to encourage ourselves and donors not to be siloed in our strategies and approaches, which is what happened with family planning and HIV, which was to the benefit of no one. And so these issues, gender, climate, SRH, environment, they all overlap significantly, and we need to approach them that way. She also emphasized Ndola's C word co-creation. Yeah, so I'll start there and then we can open up to the room. That's some good ones that first came through.
Would anyone like to share either an action or advice for others?
I'm gonna say my action is actually getting back in touch with my art and creativity. Something we talked a little bit about this, that it can feel very soul sucking to confront some of these issues. And I think for a while, especially during COVID, I got sort of frozen and then did that for me. And I just realized, as you said, Joseph, we can't be coming from a place of fear, we have to be coming from a more creative place than that. And then that's where we'll sort of find those innovative solutions. So a number of my friends and I, including some of our family workers, are creative writers and artists and singers and songwriters. And so we've been getting little creative circles together, and it's really magical. I think it's, yeah, just reinvigorated my energy for the fact that we have.
Thanks, Jojo. And for those online, if it didn't capture, coming to art, coming to creative circles. I love actually bringing in community with that to offer another. Thank you for sharing. And anyone else, and feel free if you're willing to come up and get their microphone, we'd appreciate it so you could hear more. Like doubling the exposure, right? Walking up in a room and sharing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
These are fine. Anything else to add?
I mean, I can share. I mean, for me, I have 6 and 8-year-old daughters, but I really feel like where I'm coming to it from love and like feeling hope is like really seeing what they're doing and helping them love nature, but also Paige was there as well. Our daughters go to the same school, but there was a protest on Friday and it was really exciting to see like 6 and 8-year-olds. And I didn't catch the first part of the slogan, but the second part was like 5, 6, 7, 8. Renewable power in every state, which felt really exciting to see like little kids holding up signs. And I was like, there really is a lot of hope out there, especially with the young people. So trying to help support them for me has felt a way where I could have more involvement that felt positive and not so fearful.
Yeah.
And then I have someone here saying, as an SRHR advocate, I'm creating awareness on gender equity with my target audience being teenagers. while incorporating climate change interventions such as tree planting in high schools and around campus, which is a very cool one.
Amazing. Well, thanks to us for taking the time to reflect. Anyone else? Final moment to add it in. Please. Oh, we got two. Great.
I was just really, to build on what Karen was saying, I was just excited by what Sono mentioned about climate change education and just the challenge for us all to like think about how young can we do it? Like starting with preschoolers, kindergartners, both with climate change education and also sex ed. Like, why are we starting sex ed at 5th grade when we should be doing, you know, basic relationships, consent and all that? Those basic building blocks of gender equality at younger years, like they do in the Netherlands and stuff.
Mhm.
So I just think that, like, you know, if you start young, you can make that link between, you know, the child's love for animals and love for, you know, flowers and then, or whatever it is, and then just start in that positive sense and build from there. Because I read somewhere that it's more powerful, it could be much more powerful to invest money in education, climate change education for children than to try to spend the money in mitigation. So like, that's because of the gender equity spillover effects and the fact that whatever the child, you know, absorbs in their younger years, they could carry it on throughout their lives and also share it with their children. So it has a lot more bang for its buck.
Wow.
Mhm.
Thank you. You'd like to share?
Yeah, so I'm a lawyer and I think in my own country in Europe, it was a very siloed job. And I've been in the realm of public health recently and just working with other people and other professionals within my field as a lawyer and not being siloed was really enriching. And I think I'm starting a new journey now and interested in all these issues. And I think it's really important to not stay within your, whatever profession or whether field you're in. I'm learning and I'm on a great on a great journey. So I think that's what I'm living right now, but also the advice that I give is to always think out of the box and try to, work with other professionals and not be closed to the exchange, because I think that really enhances policy in the long term. And I can see it when I've litigated cases.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to our panelists for one more lap of advice or action that you're doing. One other note, we're going to consolidate and try to JoJo's good advice to bring it into an artistic representation of what you all, if you're willing to share, there is a basket in the back. We'll consolidate what's online. Please add it if you haven't. So back to my panelists. What's either another level of advice or an action that you are taking presently? Would you like to start? Love it.
Yeah. Sure. So some of the actions that I'm taking presently but wanted to do more and continue to start to find ways to do more is really sort of because of where I see it, the training of the next generations that are going to go into our workforce that already understands, and as I wrote it down, like it's able to connect the dots and doesn't, irrespective of the profession that they go, that they still have the knowledge of connecting the importance of gender equity for the health of the planet. So that's one of my important missions, and I will continue to do that. But going back to the core designs of the project, even though I felt like it's a wildest dreams, it's not actually that wild. I think that once a significant critical mass of us does it, then it's going to become the standard, right? It's just like a transition because of where we come from in terms of designing our projects. But what is really important in this sort of multidisciplinary collaborations to improve the environment is that they are gender transformative, that we don't fall back into the sort of gender norms that are important for every community, but we know that in certain places put women down. So or discriminate against other genders. So it is important that we look at the projects that we design and everything that we do with the gender lens. And yes, Paige, I think that starting in elementary school is key. to understand. And the other thing is just basically continue the fight for gender equity. I don't really believe that we as a society can move ahead as fast as we need to without gender equity. And we have examples in other places, small communities where that has done. And we can, with gender equity, move much faster in what we need to do for the health of the planet. But we need to be intentional. So it's not just after we see the picture that we saw in terms of the leadership that we realize what is missing. We have to generate, we have to educate and create the pool that is necessary in terms of diversity to be represented in any leadership capacity. Thank you.
Yes, to all that and adding, really, yes. Two ads. One, I am taking the action of advocating with funders. I think it's really important to broach these conversations. I'm another C word, courageous in doing that. I just think it's important to say what is, give a systems perspective, and to really name truth. So that's something. Just over the weekend, I happened to be with some terrific funders who are really serious about this, and we were out on their ranch. They're planting. You can look it up, archangel trees, they're ancient sequoias to be able to stand the test of 2,000 years. And I said, and to all of this, how are we also bringing gender equity? How are we also informing community and youth around each other? So it's really the yes and with funder conversations. I love. My second one is think big.
Great. Yes, yes, yes. All of that. And building on that, I know that some sexual reproductive health and rights advocates are on the line and here today. So I want to say that there is opportunity for us to interact more with climate policymakers, ministries of environment, of energy. They're all thinking about, the setbacks that will happen if they don't participate in thinking about public health and global health issues. And so it's a great opportunity to insert some of the language around gender and reproductive health and rights into climate adaptation plans, both nationally, but also locally. And I think donors would also find it very exciting to support that because there's a lot of movement happening at the country level.
Yes, to all of that. One of the things I wrote down on advice was like start small, but be loud. And really, you take everything that you know with you everywhere that you go, and like the sort of thoughts and reflections that we have around these intersections of climate change and gender and health are things that we can insert, everywhere. And I think that the other part too, I found, for me, becoming more engaged within different communities has been really, really energizing. Both thinking about participating in, youth-focused communities around mental health and climate change, but then also, being more engaged within like the city where I live and getting to know like, oh, they don't mention gender in their climate change plan and who's in charge of that and how can I connect with the Environmental Commission? And as it turns out, you can go meet them anytime. And so I think really, taking those steps of thinking about, oh, well, how can I start where I am with what I have and with who I know.
And mine will just be connect. Find opportunities like this for learning. Connect your own professional backgrounds. If you've deviated in your own path, keep those connections, explore this, and make time, like preserve time on your calendar to actually preserve. And the second one is exercise abundance. And today I want to exercise abundance gratitude for the incredible panel here, for folks online, for those in the room, for engaging in this topic and hopefully continuing to stay really curious and really focused on the needed transitions that need to come. Again, Karen, thank you to you. Thank you to Cece. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Please stay. Come upstairs.
Yes, if you are.
Continue the connections. Yeah.
For those online, thank you and have a great rest of your day.
And yeah.
All right, so are we